Corporate compliance seemed boring until it saved my career. As Director Marcus sneered, "We're migrating you to the basement, darling." I quietly placed my security badge on the conference table. Nobody noticed the small device attached to its back, recording every conversation in our executive wing for 6 months. Our lawyer's face drained of color when he realized what I had. 20 years at Westmore Financial taught me one thing. Powerful men believe themselves untouchable, right until the moment they discover they're not. The Westmore Financial headquarters stood tall in downtown Chicago, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sun as I swiped my badge at the entrance. The familiar beep granted me access to the world I'd been part of for 12 years. A world where I'd fought my way up from an entry-level position to head of the compliance department. My name is Hilda Watson, and at 34, I'd become the youngest department head in Westmore's 60-year history. The journey hadn't been easy in a company where family connections and Ivy League educations typically determined advancement. I had neither. Just a finance degree from a state university and a fierce determination to prove myself. "Morning, Miss Watson," called the security guard as I passed the front desk. "Good morning, Frank. How's that granddaughter of yours doing?" His face lit up. "Started walking last weekend. Got it all on video. That little girl's gonna be running marathons before she turns 2. I smiled genuinely, appreciating this small human connection before entering the elevator that would take me to the executive floor. The higher you went in the Westmore building, the thicker the carpets, and the older the money. Floor 38 housed the compliance department, my domain, where we ensured the company adhered to financial regulations. Not the most glamorous role, but one I believed in deeply. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into a hallway adorned with portraits of Westmore's founders and past CEOs, all men, all wearing the same stern expression that seemed to say, "We handle serious money for serious people." My assistant, Tanya, handed me a coffee as I entered. "Your 9 o'clock got moved to 10. The quarterly reports are on your desk. And Janet wants to see you before her retirement party this afternoon." Janet Miller had been my mentor since my first day at Westmore. At 55, she was taking early retirement after 25 years in compliance. She'd taught me everything I knew about navigating the complex world of financial regulations and, more importantly, the even more complex world of corporate politics. I found her in her half-packed office, surrounded by boxes and remnants of a distinguished career. "There she is," Janet said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Got a minute?" I closed the door behind me. "Everything okay?" Janet sighed, gesturing for me to sit. "You know I've been doing this long enough to see patterns. The company's changing, Hilda. Not for the better. The new digital initiatives? It's more than that. The board's pressure for higher returns is pushing executives to cut corners. They see compliance as an obstacle." She lowered her voice. "You need to protect yourself. Janet, you're worrying me." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small box. "A retirement gift for you. Ironically, I've been saving it." Inside was what looked like an ordinary badge holder, similar to the one already holding my company ID. "It's special," Janet said. "A friend in security tech designed it. The back panel contains a recording device, completely undetectable." I stared at her, shocked. "Janet, that's legal in this state. Single-party consent for recordings. I never needed to use it, but..." She reached across the desk to squeeze my hand. "Trust no one, Hilda. Promise me." That afternoon, the executive floor's largest conference room hosted Janet's retirement party. Champagne flowed freely as executives who'd barely acknowledged her existence suddenly became effusive about her contributions. I stood near the window, watching the performance, when I caught a fragment of conversation from behind a pillar. Getting rid of the compliance problem came Director Marcus Blackwood's voice, clear and confident. "After the quarter ends," CFO Tyler Reynolds responded quietly. "Too visible right now." I shifted slightly to see them, crystal flutes in hand, both looking directly at me. Marcus raised his glass in a mock toast, his eyes cold. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what Janet had been trying to tell me. I wasn't facing simple corporate politics. I was facing a threat, and for the first time in my career, I wondered if my badge, both literal and figurative, might not be enough to protect me. The first concrete sign of trouble came 3 weeks after Janet's retirement. My team had flagged potential violations in our newest investment products disclosures. The risk factors weren't properly disclosed to clients, a clear regulatory red flag. I'd sent a comprehensive report to the executive team, complete with recommended corrections and a timeline. The response: silence. After a week of waiting, I scheduled a meeting with Director Marcus Blackwood, who oversaw product development. His executive assistant eyed me warily when I arrived at his corner office. "He's on a call, but said to send you in," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Marcus sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his 6'2" frame leaning back in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. At 47, he had the confident air of someone born into privilege and determined to maintain it. He gestured to a chair without ending his call. "Yes, Richard. We'll make sure it happens," he said to the person on the other end. "The returns are guaranteed. Don't worry about the regulatory side. It's handled." He hung up and turned to me with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Hilda, to what do I owe the pleasure? I sent a compliance report last week about the Meridian Fund disclosures. We haven't received any response." Marcus shuffled some papers on his desk. "Ah, yes. The team reviewed it. We've decided to proceed with the current documentation." I leaned forward. "Marcus, there are material omissions in those disclosures. We're legally required to." "The legal team disagrees with your assessment," he interrupted. "James reviewed it personally and cleared the documents." James Peterson had joined as corporate counsel just 2 months ago. We'd had lunch together twice, and he'd seemed supportive of compliance efforts. This was the first I'd heard of his involvement. "I wasn't aware legal had reviewed our findings," I said carefully. "Could I see their analysis?" Marcus's smile tightened. "James reports to me on these matters. If you have concerns, take them up through proper channels." "I am the proper channel for compliance issues," I reminded him. "That's literally my job description." "Your job," Marcus said, standing to signal the meeting was over, "is to document policy, not obstruct progress. We have investors to please and competitors to beat. Sometimes that means accepting reasonable risk." I stood my ground. "There's nothing reasonable about misleading clients." For a brief moment, Marcus's mask slipped, and I glimpsed something dangerous in his expression. Then it was gone, replaced by corporate blandness. "Thank you for your input, Hilda. We'll take it under advisement." Over the next month, my concerns multiplied. 3 more compliance recommendations were ignored. Emails went unanswered. Meeting invitations were declined. I found an ally in Drew Garcia, a systems analyst in IT who'd helped set up our compliance monitoring software. We often grabbed coffee in the small shop across from Westmore, away from corporate ears. "It's not just you," Drew said one afternoon, his voice low despite the cafe's ambient noise. "It's been instructed to restrict access to certain databases. They've created a whole parallel system for something called Project Rialto. Only senior execs have access." "What kind of system?" I asked, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. "Investment tracking, from what I can tell. But it's isolated from the main network, which means it's not subject to normal compliance monitoring." I thought of Janet's warning and the strange badge she'd given me. It sat in my desk drawer, unused. Using it felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. My isolation at work grew palpable. Colleagues who once sought my advice now avoided eye contact in hallways. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Lunch invitations dried up. James, The corporate counsel was the exception. He still met me for occasional coffees, asking about my concerns with what seemed like genuine interest. His presence was a relief tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He appeared to be the only executive who didn't see compliance as the enemy. "I've heard rumblings about your reports getting sidelined," he said during one such coffee. "If you want to talk strategy, I'm here. Sometimes these things require a different approach." I was about to confide in him when my phone buzzed with an urgent email notification. I glanced down and froze. "I have to go," I said, gathering my things quickly. Back at my office, I tried again to access our core compliance databases, but the same error message appeared. "Access restricted. Contact system administrator." My team gathered around my desk, all facing the same issue. 12 years of compliance records, monitoring systems, and regulatory communication all suddenly beyond our reach. I called Drew immediately. "I'm already looking into it," he said before I could explain. "This came from the top, Hilda. Direct order from Marcus. That's not possible. He can't just shut down compliance monitoring. It's legally required." Drew's silence spoke volumes. "I need to see Richard," I said, referring to CEO Richard Westmore. "This goes beyond Marcus." "Good luck getting that meeting," Drew replied. "But Hilda, be careful." I hung up, staring at the useless computer screen. This wasn't just corporate politics anymore. Something systematic was happening. Something that required silencing the entire compliance function. Janet's voice echoed in my head. "Trust no one." I opened my drawer and took out the special badge holder. Sometimes protection required uncomfortable measures. Whatever Westmore's executives were hiding, I needed to find out before it was too late for the company, for our clients, and for my career. That night, I sat at my kitchen table examining Janet's parting gift. The badge holder looked normal from the front, but the back contained a nearly invisible panel that slid open to reveal a tiny microphone and memory card. A small instruction sheet explained how to activate it, download recordings, and replace the battery. My hands trembled slightly as I considered the implications. Recording conversations without disclosure walked a dangerous line, even if technically legal in our state. Once I started down this path, there would be no going back. I thought about the restricted databases, Marcus's dismissive attitude, and the mysterious Project Rialto. Something serious was happening at Westmore Financial. Something executives were deliberately hiding from compliance review. For the clients, I whispered to myself, sliding my security badge into the special holder. If the company was engaging in practices that harmed investors, I had a professional and moral obligation to uncover it. The next morning, I arrived at work early, heart pounding as I swiped my badge at the executive floor entrance. The small green light indicated the recording device was active. Every conversation within a 10-foot radius would now be captured. My strategy was simple. Be present where decisions happened. I volunteered for committees, inserted myself into meetings, and lingered in executive spaces. I placed my badge conspicuously on conference tables, clip it to lanyards during casual discussions, and hang it visibly during impromptu hallway conversations. After 2 weeks, I had hours of recordings, but nothing conclusive. Executives were careful, speaking in coded terms or cutting conversations short when I approached. But I persisted, gradually piecing together fragments of information. Project Rialto, I learned, was a high-return investment product offered exclusively to Westmore's ultra-wealthy clients. The returns promised were significantly above market rates, impossible numbers in the current economy without substantial undisclosed risk. I needed access to the segregated system Drew had mentioned. During another clandestine coffee meeting, I explained what I needed without revealing why. Drew ran a hand through his hair nervously. "You're talking about bypassing security protocols I helped create. That's not just firing territory, that's potentially criminal." "I'm not asking you to access it yourself," I assured him. Just tell me if there's a way I could review the data without leaving footprints. He hesitated, loyalty clearly warring with self-preservation. Finally, he sighed. The system logs all regular access attempts, but there's a maintenance port that doesn't track the same way. It's meant for emergency system recovery. He scribbled something on a napkin. This IP address. It's only accessible from within the building network. I never told you this. Thank you, I said, memorizing the address before destroying the napkin. I know I'm putting you in a difficult position. Just be careful, Hilda. These guys play hardball. That night, long after most employees had gone home, I accessed the maintenance port from my office. What I found chilled me to the bone. Project Rialto wasn't just bending rules, it was breaking them outright. Client funds were being invested in high-risk, unregistered securities through offshore vehicles. The documentation was deliberately misleading, and the risk calculations were manipulated to hide the true exposure. Most damning of all, I found emails between Marcus and Richard discussing how to keep these activities hidden from regulatory interference, specifically mentioning the compliance department as an obstacle. I downloaded everything I could find onto an encrypted drive, my hands shaking with a mixture of vindication and terror. This wasn't just regulatory violations, this was fraud on a massive scale. The next morning, I arrived to find James waiting by my office. Got a minute? He asked with an easy smile. Wanted to check in on that access issue you were having. I invited him in, careful to keep my expression neutral despite my racing heart. Had they discovered my late-night activity? James settled into a chair. I spoke with Marcus about your team's database access. He mentioned concerns about data security, but I think I convinced him to restore limited functionality. That's good news, I said cautiously. We need to work together on this, Hilda. The company's going through changes, but compliance still matters. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Between us, I think Marcus sometimes gets overzealous about new initiatives. If you're seeing specific issues, bring them to me directly. I can help navigate the politics. His expression seemed genuine, his offer of alliance tempting in my increasingly isolated position. For a moment, I considered confiding in him about Project Rialto. I appreciate that, James. I'll keep it in mind. After he left, I sat staring at my office door, Janet's warning ringing in my ears. Trust no one. That afternoon, I placed my recording badge in the executive conference room during what was supposed to be a routine operations meeting. I was called away to handle an urgent client issue, leaving my badge behind accidentally. When I retrieved it hours later, the recording captured a conversation that shattered any remaining trust I had in James. She's still digging, came Marcus's voice. It flagged unusual access patterns last night. The maintenance port? James asked, confirming my worst fears. I told you. We should have closed that loophole. Did she find anything useful? That was Richard's voice. Unlikely, James replied. The sensitive documents are segregated. But we should accelerate the plan. Move her team under operations. Restrict their function to documentation only. And if she causes problems? Richard asked. Then we have plenty of performance issues to cite, Marcus said. James has been documenting them for weeks. James, the one person I thought might be an ally, had been building a case against me all along. The revelation felt like a physical blow. I was completely alone in this fight, surrounded by executives willing to commit fraud and destroy anyone who got in their way. That night, I copied all my evidence to multiple drives, hiding them in different locations. Whatever happened next, I needed to ensure the truth would eventually come to light, even if I wasn't the one to reveal it. The character assassination began subtly. First came the meeting invitations that arrived after the meetings had already started. Then critical emails that mysteriously landed in my spam folder. Soon, formal warnings appeared in my personnel file for issues I'd never been informed about. Failure to complete timely reviews. Insufficient team management. obstructive approach to business objectives. Each complaint was vague enough to be indefensible yet damning in aggregate. When I tried to address them with HR, I was told they were documented concerns from multiple department heads and advised to focus on improvement rather than excuses. The isolation spread beyond professional boundaries. Lunch tables emptied when I approached. Conversations stopped when I entered the break room. Even team members I'd worked with for years began distancing themselves, fear of association outweighing loyalty. My badge continued recording, capturing damning fragments day by day. Marcus referring to me as the compliance problem. James strategizing ways to limit my authority. Richard questioning whether I was temperamentally suited to my role, suggesting I was becoming paranoid. The stress followed me home. Sleep became elusive, replaced by hours of reviewing recordings and documents, searching for the final pieces of evidence I needed. My apartment, once a sanctuary, began to feel like an extension of the office walls covered in notes. Laptop always open to financial records and regulatory citations. My brother Scott, who lived across town, became increasingly concerned during our weekly phone calls. "You don't sound like yourself, Hilda," he said one evening. "This job is consuming you." "It's complicated," I replied, unwilling to burden him with details that might put him at risk. "It's a job, not your life," Scott insisted. "Walk away before they destroy your reputation. Finance jobs are plentiful in Chicago." "It's not that simple," I said, wishing I could explain how thousands of clients' savings were at stake, how walking away would mean letting the fraud continue unchecked. "Nothing is worth what this is doing to you," he said softly. "Promise me you'll at least consider other options." I promised, knowing I wouldn't. I was in too deep now, with too much evidence of wrongdoing, to simply walk away. My career at Westmore might be circling the drain, but I was determined to ensure I wasn't the only one who went down. The next week brought a crucial breakthrough. While reviewing recordings from an executive committee meeting I'd been explicitly excluded from, I captured Marcus and Tyler discussing the reallocation of client funds to cover Project Rialto losses. "The Meridian Fund is underperforming," Tyler said. "We need to move $50 million from conservative accounts to cover the shortfall before quarterly reporting." "Do it through the Cayman structure," Marcus replied. "James has the paperwork ready. Compliance won't see it. And if they ask questions?" Someone else inquired. "They won't," Richard's voice answered confidently. "We're restructuring that department next week. Hilda's team will be distributed to other functions. She'll be handling document retention in the basement archives, alone." Laughter followed the comfortable laughter of men who believed themselves untouchable. I sat frozen, the recording playing on loop as I processed the implications. They were planning to dismantle the entire compliance function and relegate me to a meaningless role while they continued misappropriating client funds. The scheme was larger and more brazen than I'd imagined. That night, I began organizing my evidence systematically, creating a comprehensive timeline of violations with supporting documentation. If I was going to be relegated to the basement, I needed everything in perfect order for what would come next. The following morning, passing the executive conference room, I heard my name mentioned and paused, placing my badge discreetly near the partially open door. "The compliance issue is nearly resolved," Marcus was saying. "But we have another problem. The State Regulatory Commission is sending someone for the quarterly review next month. Apparently, they've received anonymous concerns about our disclosures." "Anonymous?" Richard sounded alarmed. "Has to be internal," James said. "The timing suggests Hilda, but we've been monitoring her communications. Nothing's gone out. Regardless, we need to be prepared," Marcus continued. "James has developed documentation showing compliance failures under Hilda's leadership. If questions arise, we'll demonstrate that any issues stemmed from her department's incompetence, not executive direction." "Will that be enough?" Richard asked. "It will be when combined with the performance issues we've documented. We're building a clear narrative, a disgruntled employee becoming increasingly erratic, making accusations to deflect from her own failures. Her credibility won't survive scrutiny. They were planning to destroy not just my career but my entire professional reputation. They would paint me as incompetent, paranoid, vindictive, ensuring that even if I tried to speak out about their fraud, no one would believe me. I retrieved my badge, heart pounding as I returned to my office. The strategy was clever in its cruelty. By the time they finished, my word would be worthless against theirs. That evening, I made the hardest call of my professional life. Using a burner phone purchased with cash, I contacted Allison Parker, a state financial investigator I'd met at a regulatory conference the previous year. "This is unusual," she said after I explained my situation without naming Westmore. "Typically, we require formal complaints through official channels. The official channels have been compromised," I explained. "I need guidance on how to properly document what I'm seeing without exposing myself prematurely." Allison was silent for a long moment. "Meet me tomorrow. Public place. No electronic devices. I can't promise anything, but I'll hear you out." The next morning, in a busy diner 20 blocks from Westmore, I laid out the evidence for Allison while carefully avoiding anything that could compromise my recording activities. "If what you're describing is accurate," she said, her expression grave, "this is beyond standard violations. This is criminal fraud." "I need time to compile everything properly," I said. "They're moving me to a basement office next week. After that, my access will be severely limited." "Document everything," she advised. "Times, dates, specific actions. Focus on the paper trail for fund movements. That's concrete evidence they can't easily explain away. When you're ready, we'll discuss formal next steps." As I walked back to the office, a weight lifted slightly from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I wasn't completely alone in this fight. But the hardest part was still ahead, gathering final evidence while surviving long enough professionally to use it. That evening, returning to my apartment, I immediately sensed something wrong. The door was locked as I'd left it. But inside, subtle things were out of place. A book angled differently on the shelf, a drawer not fully closed. My laptop, which I'd left closed, was open slightly. Someone had been in my apartment. With shaking hands, I checked my hidden evidence locations. The main drive behind the kitchen ventilation panel was gone. My blood ran cold until I remembered the backups, one in a waterproof container in the toilet tank, another in a hollowed-out book at my brother's house, a third in a cloud account registered under a pseudonym. They were getting desperate, resorting to breaking and entering. It should have terrified me, but instead, it confirmed what I already knew. I had evidence worth stealing. Evidence that could bring down everyone involved in Project Rialto. Tomorrow would be the board meeting where my migration to the basement would be formalized. It would also be the day external auditors presented their quarterly findings, auditors who had no idea what was really happening behind Westmore's glossy facade. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd planned it myself. I gathered my remaining evidence drives, reviewed the most damning recordings one final time, and prepared for what would likely be my last day as Westmore's head of compliance. Whatever happened tomorrow, there would be no going back. Dawn broke over Chicago as I carefully prepared for the most important day of my career. I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back severely. I wanted to look professional, forgettable, and above all, unthreatening. Let them believe I had accepted defeat. The evidence was arranged across 3 platforms: a cloud backup accessible only with a complex password, physical drives hidden with my brother and a trusted former colleague, and one final drive concealed in a hidden compartment of my purse. Redundancy was my only protection now. My apartment door now had 2 new locks installed after the break-in. I had no illusions they would keep determined intruders out, but they might slow them down enough to trigger the silent alarm I'd also installed. Scott had insisted on these precautions, his initial skepticism now replaced by grave concern for my safety. "You're dealing with people who break into homes, Hilda," he'd said while installing the locks. "This isn't just about your job anymore." He wasn't wrong. In the past week, I documented a systematic effort to erase my professional credibility and isolate me completely. Performance warnings multiplied in my file. Emails I sent disappeared from the server. Team members were reassigned one by one until I sat alone in a department meant for 12. Most troubling were the conversations my badge captured in executive spaces, discussions about my emotional instability and persecution complex, carefully crafted narratives designed to discredit anything I might say about Project Rialto. Through Drew's covert assistance, I had continued gathering evidence about the fraudulent activities. The scope was staggering. Over $300 million of client funds diverted through offshore vehicles, falsified returns, manipulated risk assessments, and deliberate regulatory evasion. Yesterday, Drew had taken the biggest risk yet, accessing the system through his administrative credentials to retrieve a file showing executive knowledge and approval of the illegal transfers. "This is it," he'd said, passing me a drive in the stairwell. The smoking gun. Every transfer authorization, digitally signed by Richard, Marcus, and James. "If they discover I pulled this, I'm finished." "Why are you helping me?" I'd asked, genuinely curious given the risk he was taking. Drew had looked at me seriously. "My parents lost everything in 2008 because people like this thought rules didn't apply to them. Some things matter more than job security." The board meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock, followed immediately by the external audit presentation at 9:30. My reassignment to basement archives was on the agenda, a humiliating public demotion designed to serve as warning to anyone else who might question executive decisions. What Marcus, James, and Richard didn't know was that I'd been in contact with Benjamin Hayes, the external lawyer conducting the audit. Through Allison's discreet introduction, I had provided him with just enough information to ask the right questions without revealing my role as the source. "The audit will proceed normally," Benjamin had assured me during our brief off-site meeting. "But I'll be looking more closely at the areas you flagged. If what you're suggesting is happening, there will be discrepancies I can identify even with limited access." Now, as I walked toward the Westmore building for perhaps the last time as a respected professional, I mentally reviewed every detail of my preparation. The recording badge was charged and active. The evidence drive was secure in my purse. My answers to potential questions were rehearsed but not scripted. I had planned for every contingency except one, the possibility that all my efforts would fail. "Good morning, Miss Watson." Frank, the security guard, greeted me, his usual warmth now tinged with awkwardness. Even here, on the ground floor, rumors of my problems had spread. "Morning, Frank," I replied with a calm I didn't feel. "Big day today." "Yes, ma'am," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Good luck up there." The executive floor was unusually active for this early hour. Board members in expensive suits clustered in small groups, while support staff hurried to finalize presentations and arrange refreshments. I noted several unfamiliar faces, the external audit team, presumably reviewing documents at a side table. I spotted Benjamin Hayes immediately, his tall frame and serious expression standing out among the Westmore regulars. Our eyes met briefly, his slight nod the only acknowledgement of our previous communication. Next to him stood a younger woman with sharp eyes methodically reviewing a thick binder. The audit associate, I guessed, unaware of the storm about to break. Marcus approached, his practiced smile firmly in place for the board members nearby. "Hilda, glad you could join us. We'll be discussing your new role after the financial reviews." His voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear, establishing the narrative of a routine reorganization rather than a punitive demotion. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching his professional tone while placing my badge prominently on my lapel, the recording light invisible to anyone not looking for it. James stood with Richard near the boardroom doors, both watching me with expressions of calculated neutrality. They'd orchestrated every aspect of today's meeting to ensure my humiliation and professional death would appear entirely justified and unavoidable. Board members began filing into the main conference room. I took my assigned seat near the far end of the table, away from the executives and clearly positioned as an afterthought. Benjamin and his team set up at the opposite end, arranging materials for their presentation. As Marcus called the meeting to order, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Months of fear, isolation, and uncertainty crystallized into a single, clear purpose. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine not just my future, but the safety of thousands of clients whose trust had been systematically betrayed. I placed my badge on the table in front of me and waited for my moment. The boardroom of Westmore Financial embodied corporate power in every detail. 20 feet of gleaming mahogany table, leather chairs for 20 people, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Portrait photographs of past chairmen lined one wall, their stern faces witnessing today's proceedings with painted disapproval. Richard Westmore sat at the head of the table, the current inheritor of the family legacy, flanked by Marcus and James. Board members filled most seats, with the external audit team positioned prominently near the front. I sat alone near the far end, deliberately isolated. Before we proceed to the audit presentation, Marcus announced after preliminary matters concluded, "We have a staffing update. As part of our ongoing digital transformation, we're restructuring several departments to improve operational efficiency." His eyes flickered briefly to me. A flash of triumph quickly concealed. The compliance function will be integrated into operational teams, with oversight centralized under legal. Hilda will transition to managing our regulatory archive in the lower level, ensuring our historical documentation meets retention requirements. Translation: I was being buried in the basement with decades of paper records, stripped of authority and access to current operations. Several board members glanced my way, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. None spoke up. Whether they believed the transparent cover story or simply didn't care enough to question it remained unclear. This transition will take effect immediately following today's meeting. Marcus continued smoothly. Now, let's welcome Benjamin Hayes and his team for the quarterly audit presentation. Benjamin stood, his tall frame commanding attention as he distributed bound reports to each person at the table. "Thank you for the introduction," he began, his deep voice carrying authority. "Our review this quarter focused particularly on disclosure, adequacy, and fund management protocols, areas where regulatory scrutiny has intensified industry-wide. For the next 20 minutes, Benjamin methodically presented findings that appeared largely positive, noting only minor issues requiring attention. I watched the executive team gradually relax, clearly believing the danger had passed. Then Benjamin reached the final section of his presentation. Before concluding, "There's one additional area requiring board attention." He turned to his associate. "Jessica, please distribute the supplementary materials." The young woman handed out thin folders containing what appeared to be a single document. Marcus frowned, clearly not expecting this addition. "During our review," Benjamin continued, "we identified anomalous transaction patterns in several high-net-worth client accounts. Further investigation revealed substantial fund movements through offshore vehicles not fully disclosed in client documentation." Richard's relaxed posture vanished. "I believe those transactions fall under the enhanced management program discussed in previous sessions." "Perhaps," Benjamin acknowledged. "But the routing mechanisms raise significant regulatory concerns, particularly when compared against the disclosure documents provided to clients." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Board members shifted uncomfortably, some opening the supplementary folder with increased interest. "These appear to be technical matters," James interjected smoothly. "We can address them in a separate compliance review without consuming the board's valuable time." "Ordinarily, I would agree," Benjamin replied. "However, the magnitude of the discrepancies merits immediate board awareness. We're potentially discussing regulatory violations, across multiple jurisdictions. Marcus's face hardened. We appreciate your thoroughness, Benjamin, but you may be overinterpreting standard investment structures. Perhaps if you had consulted with our compliance team. His gaze cut to me with barely disguised contempt. Though given recent performance issues there, perhaps the confusion is understandable. This was the moment they'd planned, using the audit findings to further discredit me while deflecting from the actual violations. I recognized the strategy from a dozen recorded conversations. The careful groundwork they'd laid to ensure any problems would be attributed to compliance failures under my leadership. Richard cleared his throat. I believe we should conclude the general session and move to executive discussion. Hilda, thank you for joining us this morning. As mentioned, your new office is prepared in the archives section. HR will assist with your transition. The dismissal was both professional and final, a public execution of my career conducted with corporate politeness. I was being escorted out while the real discussions would happen behind closed doors, where the executives would undoubtedly minimize Benjamin's concerns and redirect blame. I stood slowly, feeling all eyes on me. This was the moment everything had built toward. The single opportunity to break through months of systematic isolation and discreditation. My hands didn't shake as I picked up my security badge from the table. Instead of walking toward the door, I stepped forward and placed my badge directly in front of Benjamin. Before I go to my new basement office, I said, my voice steady in the sudden silence, you should know what this badge contains. Benjamin looked down at the badge, then back at me with a carefully neutral expression. The company might want to reconsider my reassignment after you've had a chance to examine the recording device attached to this badge, I continued, and the hundreds of hours of executive conversations it's captured over the past 6 months. Marcus's face contorted. What the hell are you talking about? This is preposterous. Single-party consent state, I interrupted calmly. Every conversation is legally recorded. Every discussion of fund diversions, every plan to circumvent regulations, every strategy session on how to dismantle compliance oversight. The room erupted in confusion. Board members turning to each other. Richard half rising from his chair. James frantically whispering to Marcus. Through it all, Benjamin remained focused on the badge I'd placed before him, understanding dawning in his eyes. This is outrageous, Marcus shouted over the din. She's clearly unstable. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior we've been documenting. Whatever recordings she claims to have are likely manipulated or taken out of context. Benjamin held up a hand for quiet, his authority somehow cutting through the chaos. When he spoke, his voice was measured but carried to every corner of the room. Miss Watson, are you suggesting this badge contains evidence relevant to the discrepancies identified in our audit? It contains executive conversations explicitly discussing the diversion of client funds through the Cayman structure, the deliberate concealment of those activities from compliance review, and the systematic effort to discredit me when I began asking questions. I met Richard's gaze directly, including conversations in this room during meetings from which I was specifically excluded. Benjamin picked up the badge carefully, examining the subtle modifications to its standard design. He then opened the audit folder before him, comparing something in the documents to what I had just stated. His associate leaned over, whispering something urgent. Benjamin nodded, then addressed the increasingly agitated board. In light of this new information, I must advise that we pause this meeting. These allegations, if substantiated, have significant implications for our audit findings. He turned to Richard. Mr. Westmore, whose badge is this? Before Richard could respond, Marcus interjected. It's hers, obviously. Part of her delusional. It's registered to employee ID Watson 742, I stated clearly. That's me. The same ID that accessed the executive conference room at 5:17 yesterday evening, according to building security logs, when Marcus and James discussed which client accounts would be used to cover Project Rialto losses before the quarterly reporting deadline. The precision of this detail, a conversation I could only know about if I had indeed recorded it, landed like a physical blow. Several board members looked openly alarmed now, the possibility that I was telling the truth clearly sinking in. Benjamin's associate checked something on her tablet, then whispered to him again. His expression darkened. "Mr. Westmore," Benjamin said with new urgency, "I need to confirm. As of this morning, 8:01 a.m. precisely, has Westmore Financial implemented the compliance protocol revisions required by last quarter's regulatory guidance?" The seeming non sequitur confused everyone, including me. Richard frowned. "The updates are in progress as part of our digital transformation. James is overseeing a simple yes or no, please." Benjamin interrupted. "As of 8:01 a.m. today, are the required compliance protocols fully implemented and operational?" Richard looked to James, who shook his head slightly. "No," Richard admitted. "But the timeline allows for." "Then, as of 8:01 a.m., Benjamin said gravely, "Westmore Financial is non-compliant with multiple regulatory requirements. The implementation deadline was today." He closed his folder with deliberate care. "Given Miss Watson's allegations and this confirmed compliance failure, I have no choice but to suspend our audit certification pending further investigation." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Without audit certification, Westmore couldn't complete quarterly filings. Without filings, trading authorizations would be suspended. The company would effectively be paralyzed. "This is absurd," Marcus sputtered. "You're taking the word of a disgruntled employee over." "I'm taking nothing at face value," Benjamin cut him off. "But when the head of compliance presents potential evidence of financial irregularities on the same day we independently confirm compliance failures, immediate investigation is the only prudent response." He nodded to his associate, who began packing their materials with practiced efficiency. "A separate team from our forensic division will arrive this afternoon to secure relevant systems and documents. In the meantime," he addressed the board directly, "I strongly advise against any personnel changes or system modifications that could be construed as obstruction." Translation: "Don't fire me, don't destroy evidence, and don't touch the records." Richard stood slowly, his carefully cultivated executive confidence crumbling visibly. "Surely we can discuss this privately, Benjamin. There's no need for such dramatic—" "What we need," a board member interrupted. An older woman I recognized as former federal prosecutor Eleanor Winters, "is to understand exactly what Miss Watson has recorded and what it means for this institution." She fixed Richard with a steely gaze. "And we need to do so before this leaves this room." The momentum had shifted. What had begun as my professional execution was transforming into something very different. For the first time in months, truth had found a foothold in the carefully constructed narrative Marcus and his allies had built. Benjamin turned to me. "Miss Watson, do you have additional evidence beyond what may be contained in this recording device?" "Yes," I said simply. "Complete documentation of Project Rialto, including fund transfers, falsified client disclosures, and executive authorizations. I can provide everything to the forensic team when they arrive." As the boardroom erupted once more, I caught Marcus's eye across the table. The contempt was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen before: fear. 3 months after the boardroom confrontation, I stood at the window of my new office, watching spring rain wash the Chicago streets 40 floors below. The plate on my door now read Hilda Watson, Chief Compliance Officer, and my department had tripled in size. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of forensic audits, regulatory investigations, and corporate restructuring. The evidence from my badge recordings, combined with the documentation I'd gathered about Project Rialto, had revealed fraud far more extensive than even I had realized. Marcus, James, and 3 other executives had been placed on administrative leave the same day as the board meeting. 2 weeks later, all were formally terminated. Criminal investigations were ongoing, with indictments expected within the month. Richard had resigned for personal reasons, a face-saving gesture the board allowed in exchange for his full cooperation with investigators. Tyler, the CFO, had turned state's evidence almost immediately, providing prosecutors with details of the scheme in exchange for leniency. Eleanor Winters, the former prosecutor who had spoken up at the crucial moment, was now acting as interim CEO, while the board conducted an external search for permanent leadership. Under her direction, Westmore had embarked on a comprehensive reform of its governance and compliance functions. My first act as newly appointed Chief Compliance Officer had been to implement robust whistleblower protections. My second had been to rehire everyone from my original team, who had been dispersed throughout the company during Marcus's campaign against me. My third had been to promote Drew to head of systems security, with a mandate to rebuild our monitoring capabilities from the ground up. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Eleanor entered, elegant and focused as always. "The board approved your compliance restructuring proposal," she announced without preamble. "Full independence, direct reporting line, and the budget increase you requested. Congratulations." "Thank you for your support," I replied. "It wouldn't have happened without your backing." She smiled slightly. "When you've prosecuted as many financial frauds as I have, you develop a keen appreciation for strong compliance functions." She paused. "You know, several board members questioned your appointment initially. They worried your experience with Marcus and the others might make you overzealous. And what do they think now? That your experience is precisely what makes you right for the job." She gestured to the chair across from my desk. "May I?" As she sat, I noticed the folder in her hand. "The client restitution plan?" She nodded. "The first payments go out next week. Every client affected by Project Rialto will be made whole, with interest." She handed me the folder. "The board also approved your suggestion for a client advisory council on investment disclosures. We'd like you to lead it." The changes at Westmore over the past months had exceeded my most optimistic hopes. From the brink of criminal enterprise, the company was transforming into a model of ethical practice. Industry publications had begun citing our new compliance framework as a potential standard for the sector. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, producing a small box. This was Janet's idea, but the board enthusiastically endorsed it. Inside was a silver pin in the shape of a shield with Westmore's logo, bearing the inscription, "Integrity above all. We're presenting one to every member of your team," Eleanor explained, "and establishing an annual award in your name for ethical leadership. The first recipient, of course, will be you." I closed the box gently, unexpectedly moved. "Janet would appreciate the symbolism. She sends her regards from retirement," Eleanor smiled. "Though she mentioned she's available for consultation, should you ever need a veteran's perspective." After Eleanor left, I returned to the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The months of isolation and fear seemed almost like another lifetime now. What had begun as a fight for professional survival had transformed into something much more significant, a fundamental reshaping of corporate culture. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. My weekly lunch with Scott. He had been my rock throughout the ordeal, never once suggesting I should have walked away. When the story finally broke in the financial press, he had simply said, "I always knew you were the strongest person in our family." As I gathered my things to meet him, I glanced at the badge hanging around my neck. A standard company ID now. No recording device necessary. The systems we were building would make such extraordinary measures unnecessary. Transparency and accountability were becoming part of Westmore's DNA, not afterthoughts to be circumvented. The most profound lesson of the past year wasn't about financial regulations or corporate governance, though those were certainly important. It was about the power of individual integrity in the face of systemic corruption. One person, standing firmly on principle, could indeed change an entire institution. Not easily, not without cost, but definitively. 2 weeks later, I stood before a room of new compliance officers, bright, idealistic professionals beginning their careers with the reformed Westmore Financial. They looked up at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect, aware of my story through company orientation and industry coverage. Compliance isn't about rules, I told them. Rules are just tools. Compliance is about protecting real people with real lives and real savings. It's about ensuring that the trust placed in this institution is honored in every transaction, every day. I showed them my original badge, now framed on my office wall as a reminder. Sometimes integrity requires courage. Sometimes it requires standing alone. But it always matters. As they filed out after the session, one young woman lingered. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "All those months of isolation. The risk to your career. Was it worth it?" I considered her question carefully. "There was never really a choice," I finally replied. Not once I understood what was happening. Some lines, once you see them clearly, you simply cannot cross or allow others to cross while you stand by. The only real question is whether you'll have the courage to act on what you know is right. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for everything you did and for sharing the story." Today, Westmore Financial stands as a different company than it was a year ago. Our compliance systems are industry-leading. Our client communication is transparent and comprehensive. Our corporate culture celebrates ethical decision-making at every level. None of this happened by accident or through the natural evolution of business practices. It happened because one person refused to be silenced, refused to look away, and refused to accept that power should shield wrongdoing from accountability. My badge, that simple corporate ID with its hidden recording device, changed everything. But the real key was never the technology. The key was the willingness to stand firm when standing alone, to speak truth regardless of consequences, and to trust that integrity, in the end, matters more than power. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for what's right meant standing alone? What gave you the courage to follow through? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand firm in their own integrity today. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the smallest actions can create the most profound change.